The champagne glasses froze mid-air when my mother laughed. "Oh, please," she said, waving her jeweled hand dismissively, her voice echoing beneath the glittering chandeliers. "It was just a minor heart surgery. He's always been dramatic." The room chuckled. And that's when the chief surgeon slowly stood up. I remember the smell of antiseptic more vividly than her perfume that night. The hospital gala was supposed to celebrate donors, board members, and the miracle cases of the year. Crystal lights shimmered across marble floors. A live orchestra played something soft and forgettable. Wealthy guests floated around in silk and tuxedos, pretending they understood suffering because they funded it. I wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, I was the miracle. 3 months earlier, my heart had stopped on an operating table for 6 full minutes. 6 minutes of darkness. 6 minutes where machines screamed and doctors shouted, and my body lay open like something broken beyond repair. But according to my mother, it was minor. She stood at the center of the ballroom like a queen, diamonds resting against the same chest that once refused to hold me when I was wheeled into surgery. I told him he'd be fine. She continued, smiling at the donors. He just needed attention. He's always been sensitive. Sensitive. That word burned hotter than the scar running down my chest. I stood near the back of the hall, fingers pressed against the thin fabric of my suit, tracing the jagged line beneath. The scar wasn't elegant. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal, angry, a reminder that my body had been sawed open while she signed paperwork without even looking up from her phone. I didn't ask for attention. I asked for her to stay. But the night before my surgery, she left the hospital early, said she had an important dinner, said stress made her skin break out. When I woke up after the operation, tubes down my throat and wires glued to my skin, she wasn't there. Instead, the chief surgeon was. He had held my hand when my pulse weakened. He had been the one shouting for another shock when the monitors flattened into a single, merciless line. He had watched me die. So when my mother laughed at the gala and minimized the surgery that nearly erased me from existence, something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Across the ballroom, I saw him rise from his seat at the head table. Conversations began to quiet. The orchestra faltered. His expression wasn't polite. It wasn't diplomatic. It was controlled fury. "My apologies," he said, his voice cutting through crystal and ego alike. Minor. The word hung in the air like a blade. My mother's smile tightened. "Doctor, you know how boys exaggerate pain." Boys. I was 22. The chief surgeon's gaze swept the room before landing on her. "Your son coded on my table." Silence. "You signed a high-risk consent form acknowledging a 38% chance of mortality." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. "He required 3 defibrillation shocks. We transfused 4 units of blood." His heart did not beat on its own for 6 minutes and 14 seconds. Each second sounded like a hammer striking glass. "And you left before anesthesia was even administered." The room wasn't laughing anymore. I watched her posture stiffen, her hand tightening around her champagne glass. She hated losing control, hated when narratives slipped from her grip. "I was assured he'd be fine," she snapped, her voice sharpening. "No," the surgeon replied evenly. "You were informed he might die." My chest felt heavy, not from weakness, but from memory. From nights spent staring at hospital ceilings alone. From hearing nurses whisper about how lucky I was. From realizing luck had nothing to do with love. She had built an image tonight, the devoted mother, the generous donor, the woman who stood by her son. That story was unraveling thread by thread, and I let it because this wasn't impulse, it was timing. For months, I had been quiet, recovering, listening, watching, learning how power moved through rooms like this. Learning how reputations were built and destroyed. I knew about the foundation funds redirected into her private initiatives. I knew about the contracts signed under different names. I knew about the emails she thought were deleted. My heart had been repaired, but something else had been reconstructed in its place, something sharper. The chief surgeon stepped away from the table and walked toward the stage where my mother had been basking in applause moments earlier. "I believe," he said calmly, "that tonight's donors deserve the full truth." Her face drained of color. The projector behind them flickered to life. And that's when she turned her head and locked eyes with me. For the first time in my life, she looked afraid. Her fear was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. It was hidden beneath years of practiced elegance, the slight tightening of her jaw, the fractional delay before she blinked, the way her fingers trembled just once before she steadied the glass again. But I noticed. I had spent my entire childhood studying her moods the way sailors study storms. The projector hummed behind her, casting a pale glow over the stage. The guests shifted in their seats. No one reached for their drinks anymore. The orchestra had gone completely silent. "What is this?" she asked, her voice measured, controlled. But I could hear it, that thin crack in the foundation. The chief surgeon didn't answer her directly. Instead, he looked toward the control booth. A click. The first image appeared. It wasn't dramatic. No red circles. No bold accusations. Just a scanned hospital document. My consignature at the bottom. Timestamped at 11:42 p.m. Underneath it, a second image faded in beside it. Security footage from the hospital lobby. Timestamped at 11:51 p.m. Her silhouette walking out the revolving doors. Designer heels. Phone pressed to her ear. Laughing. 9 minutes after signing the form that said her son might not survive the night. A murmur rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. That proves nothing, she said quickly. I needed air. I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. I almost smiled. The surgeon's voice remained calm. At 12:07 a.m., your son went into cardiac arrest. Another click. The screen shifted again. This time it was a still frame from the operating room recording. Blurred for privacy, but clear enough to see the chaos. The flat line across the monitor. The doctor's leaning over my body, paddles raised, 20:08 a.m., 1:09 a.m., 1:25:10 a.m. 6 minutes and 14 seconds stretched across the screen like a lifetime. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." My mother's composure was thinning now. "This is highly inappropriate," she snapped. "You cannot show surgical footage at a charity gala. And you cannot call a death sentence minor," the surgeon replied. The word death landed heavier than any accusation. I felt it ripple through the room. Through her. She turned again, scanning the crowd for allies, board members, donors, anyone who would step forward and defend her image. No one moved, because money commands loyalty, but truth commands silence. And tonight, silence was choosing sides. I stepped forward then, not dramatically, not angrily. Just enough for the light from the chandelier to catch the faint ridge beneath my shirt. The scar. I didn't want this, I said, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. I didn't want embarrassment. I didn't want revenge. Her eyes widened slightly at that word. Revenge. I just wanted you to stop pretending. The room was watching me now, not her. Me. She straightened her spine. You're being emotional. You've always been too emotional. There it was again. The old script. Label the reaction. Minimize the pain. Control the narrative. But I wasn't 19 anymore. And I wasn't lying in a hospital bed waiting for her to show up. I was dead for 6 minutes. I said quietly, "Do you know what that does to a person?" She didn't answer. Of course she didn't, because the honest answer would have required empathy, and empathy was never her strength. Another image flashed onto the screen. This one wasn't provided by the surgeon. It was mine. A financial summary. Large transfers from the hospital's charity fund to a consulting firm. A consulting firm registered under a different name. Her maiden name. A collective intake of breath filled the ballroom. The surgeon glanced at me, surprised. He hadn't known about that part. I started reading during recovery, I continued. When you weren't there. Her face went pale. I read board reports, financial disclosures. Public records, I paused. You're very careful, but not careful enough. This is slander, she hissed. No, I said. This is accounting. Another click. Emails appeared, redacted but unmistakable. Subject lines discussing relocation strategy and discretion. One donor stood abruptly from his table. Is this accurate? He demanded, staring at her. She opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a polished answer ready, because this wasn't a social slight. This wasn't gossip. This was evidence. I almost died, I said, my voice lowering harder now. And while I was fighting to breathe, you were moving money meant for patients who couldn't afford to. A tear slipped down someone's cheek in the front row. I wasn't crying, not anymore. That part of me had burned out on the operating table. Security had started inching toward the stage. Not aggressively. Just cautiously, unsure who they were supposed to escort out, her or me. You ungrateful child, she whispered, venom finally replacing elegance. Everything I built was for you. I let that hang in the air. Everything she built had been for power, for status, for applause. Not for me. If it was for me, I said softly, you would have stayed. Silence, absolute crushing. The projector flickered again. This time, it showed nothing, just a blank white screen. Because I wasn't done, but I wasn't giving them everything tonight. Not yet. I stepped closer to the stage. Close enough to see the tiny fracture in her mascara where panic had begun to sweat through. This is just a preview, I said quietly, but the microphone caught every syllable. An introduction. Her breathing grew shallow. There are more records. More transactions? More footage. I tilted my head slightly. And regulators love clean evidence. A board member reached for his phone. Another followed. The dominoes were beginning to tip. You wouldn't dare, she breathed. I met her eyes. And for the first time, she understood something fundamental. I wasn't bluffing. I died once, I said. You don't scare me anymore. The doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly opened. Not loudly, but deliberately. And every head in the room turned toward the entrance as unfamiliar figures stepped inside. Dark suits, official badges glinting under the chandelier light. My mother's fingers finally lost their grip. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. And she whispered my name, not in authority, not in control, but in realization, because she finally understood this wasn't about embarrassment. This wasn't about a gala. This was about consequence. And it had just walked through the door. The sound of glass shattering echoed longer than it should have. It wasn't loud. But in a room that's silent, it felt explosive. Every conversation died mid-breath. Every camera slowly tilted toward the entrance. The men in dark suits didn't rush. They didn't need to. Authority moves differently. It doesn't chase, it arrives. My mother's face had gone completely colorless now. She knew badges. She had built her empire by avoiding them. One of the men stepped forward, calm and composed. Mrs. Whitmore. Her name sounded unfamiliar when spoken without admiration attached to it. She straightened instinctively, clinging to fragments of dignity. Yes, we need to speak with you regarding financial discrepancies connected to the hospital foundation. A ripple tore through the crowd. Board members avoided eye contact. Donors shifted uncomfortably. Some were already calculating damage control in their heads. She laughed. It was forced, brittle. This is absurd. At a charity gala, do you have any idea who I am? The man didn't blink yes. And that was the most terrifying part. For years, her name had opened doors. Tonight, it closed them. She looked at me again, not as a son, not even as an enemy, but as the variable she failed to calculate. You did this? She said quietly, the accusation heavy with disbelief. I didn't deny it, but I didn't confirm it either, because this wasn't about personal vengeance anymore. It was about exposure. You underestimated what 6 minutes can do to a person, I replied. The officials began speaking to the hospital director near the stage. Papers were shown. Quiet but urgent exchanges followed. Someone turned off the projector. The bright white screen went dark, but the damage had already been done. The room no longer sparkled. It felt smaller now, tighter, real. My mother attempted to regain composure. There must be some misunderstanding. I have lawyers. I'm sure you do. The official answered evenly. You're welcome to contact them. Her breathing quickened, barely noticeable unless you knew her tells. I knew them all. This was how she reacted when control slipped beyond retrieval. First denial, then outrage, then negotiation. Her eyes flickered to the board members. You can't let this spectacle continue, she urged them. Think of the hospital's reputation. The irony was almost poetic, reputation. The same word she used to silence me when I was younger. Don't cry. It affects our reputation. Don't speak out. It affects our reputation. Don't be weak. It affects our reputation. But now her reputation was unraveling in front of crystal chandeliers and diamond necklaces. And no one moved to shield her. Because loyalty bought with money expires when risk increases. I felt something inside me shift again. Not anger. Not triumph. Something quieter. Closure, perhaps. But it wasn't complete. Not yet. One of the officials approached her more directly. We have reason to believe funds allocated for critical patient care were rerouted through shell entities tied to your personal accounts. Gasps again. Shell entities. Personal accounts. Words that destroy legacies. She opened her mouth to argue. But another voice interrupted. The chief surgeon stepped forward. There's more, he said calmly. Her head snapped toward him. What are you doing? She whispered. Her voice cracking for the first time. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw something unexpected. Not revenge. Protection. There were also discrepancies in the post-operative care funding, he continued. Supplies delayed. Equipment requests denied. Budget shortages that didn't align with donations received. The officials exchanged glances. Now, this wasn't just financial misconduct. This was patient endangerment. The weight of that accusation was suffocating. My mother staggered back half a step. I would never risk patients, she said, but the conviction was gone. That's ridiculous, La. Wouldn't you? I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine again, and for the first time I saw something flicker there that had never existed before. Regret. Not for what she did, but for misjudging me. The room had completely shifted allegiance now. Phones were out. Messages were being sent. News would travel fast. She sensed it. Her empire wasn't collapsing slowly. It was imploding. This is because I called your surgery minor, she demanded suddenly, grasping at a simpler narrative. This is childish retaliation. I stepped closer to the stage, close enough that the officials instinctively gave space. No, I said calmly. This started long before tonight. Her brows furrowed. You think this is about a word, I continued. About embarrassment. The orchestra members were watching from their corner, instruments still in hand, frozen in disbelief. This is about the years you dismissed me. The nights you chose galas over hospital rooms. The way you trained me to believe survival was inconvenience. Her lips trembled. I had never spoken to her like this. Never publicly, never without fear. You don't get to reduce my death to a footnote. I said, voice steady as steel. You don't get to minimize what nearly ended me. Silence again. Thick, suffocating. One of the officials gently touched her arm. Mom, we're gonna need you to come with us. The finality in that sentence echoed louder than the shattered glass. She didn't resist, not physically, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. You're destroying everything, she whispered. No, I replied softly. You did that. Security began clearing space near the exit. The donors parted instinctively, as if scandal were contagious. As she was escorted toward the doors, her steps faltered. For a brief second, she looked smaller, human. But I didn't move. I didn't rush after her, because this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about consequence. The doors opened again, flashbulbs flickered from outside. The press had arrived faster than expected. Her head dipped instinctively, shielding her face from cameras. The same cameras she once courted so effortlessly. And just before she crossed the threshold, she turned back one last time. Our eyes met across the glittering wreckage of the gala, and in that silent exchange something unspoken passed between us. Not forgiveness, not hatred, recognition. She finally understood that the son she dismissed as fragile had survived long enough to become untouchable. The doors closed behind her. The ballroom remained frozen. No music, no laughter, only aftermath. The chief surgeon approached me slowly. "You planned this?" he said quietly. "Yes." He studied me for a moment. "You're certain you're ready for what comes next?" I looked around the room at the shattered image, at the board members whispering urgently, at the donors recalculating alliances. And then I touched the faint ridge beneath my shirt. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. That's how long I was gone. Long enough to lose fear. Long enough to understand that survival changes you. "I've been ready," I said. But even as I spoke those words, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then a message preview lit up the screen. "You think this ends tonight?" My breath slowed because the number wasn't unfamiliar. And the name attached to the encrypted contact wasn't my mother's. It belonged to someone far more dangerous. Someone who had benefited from those relocations. Someone who didn't wear diamonds, but controlled people who did. I looked toward the exit where flashing lights still pulsed against the closed doors, and I realized something chilling. This wasn't the end of her empire. It was the beginning of a war I had just exposed myself to. My phone vibrated again. This time, a second message appeared. "You just made yourself a target." The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration hall. It felt like a crime scene. People were whispering in tight circles, pretending not to stare at me while very clearly staring at me. The board members had retreated into a corner like nervous chess players, already planning their next move. The orchestra had quietly packed away their instruments as if music would be disrespectful in the presence of collapse. My phone buzzed again in my palm. "Unknown number, you should have stayed dead." For a moment, I felt it, that cold, instinctive flicker at the base of my spine. The kind that reminds you you're still human. But fear no longer paralyzed me. It clarified me. I lifted my eyes and scanned the room carefully this time. Not as a son. Not as a victim, but as someone who had just pulled a pin and was waiting to see what detonated. Who here knew more than they were showing? Who here had benefited from my mother's schemes? And more importantly, who stood to lose everything if she talked? The chief surgeon stepped closer. "You're pale," he said quietly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." I answered automatically I wasn't. But weakness in public is leverage for predators. And tonight, I had revealed too much to appear vulnerable. Another message. This one contained an image, a live photo. My hospital room taken tonight. The angle was from the hallway. My stomach tightened. Recovery wing. 4th floor. Restricted access. That wasn't a random threat. That was surveillance. I turned slightly, masking the movement as casual while zooming into the image. There faint in the reflection of the glass window, a silhouette, tall, broad shoulders, watching. The gala doors were still closed, flashing lights spilling faintly beneath them. My mother was likely already inside a vehicle, cameras pressed to tinted windows, lawyers scrambling to intercept the narrative. But this was something separate, a shadow network behind the charity. Money laundering rarely stops at vanity projects. It feeds larger machines. And I had just disrupted the supply line. The surgeon noticed my focus. "What is it?" "Nothing." I said, a lie, but not one I could afford to explain here. The board chairman approached cautiously, sweat visible along his temples. "We need to control the press," he muttered. "We can issue a statement distancing the hospital from Mrs. Whitmore immediately." Distancing, that word again. Everyone distances when fire spreads. I nodded politely. "Do what you need to?" He hesitated. You won't be speaking to media, will you?" I almost laughed. "I haven't decided." His eyes flickered with calculation. Good, let them calculate. Because uncertainty is power. My phone buzzed again. Tick. Talk. I stepped away from the center of the room, moving toward a quieter hallway that branched off from the ballroom. The noise dulled behind me, replaced by the soft hum of air conditioning and distant footsteps. I opened the full message thread. "Unknown number. You exposed the wrong people. The woman was replaceable. You are not." My pulse remained steady. 6 minutes without a heartbeat does something strange to your relationship with danger. You stop fearing death the way others do. You start measuring risk differently. Replaceable. That word lingered. My mother had built an empire on perception, but perception is just the visible layer. Underneath it are operators, silent investors, fixers. She was the face, but faces can be removed. The machinery continues. I typed slowly. "Then send someone better." 3 dots appeared instantly. So they were watching live. "Interesting, you think you're untouchable because you survived once." I stared at the message. No, I wasn't untouchable. I was prepared. Footsteps echoed behind me. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned. The chief surgeon. He studied my face carefully. Something changed, he said quietly. I considered dismissing him, but he had been there when my heart stopped. He had watched life leave my body and return. That kind of shared experience creates a strange loyalty. There are others involved, I said finally. He didn't look surprised. I assumed as much, he replied. Of course he did. He had probably seen funding anomalies for years, but lacked proof strong enough to act. My confrontation tonight accelerated what might have taken months. Be careful. He added, you embarrassed powerful people. I didn't embarrass them. I corrected calmly. I exposed them. He held my gaze for a long moment. Exposure invites retaliation? I'm counting on it. That made him pause. You want them to move? Yes, because predators only reveal themselves when threatened. If they stayed hidden, they'd rebuild quietly. But if they felt cornered, they would act, and action leaves traces. My phone vibrated again. Final warning, I exhaled slowly. Then I typed one word. Prove it. This time, the response didn't come immediately. Good, let them think, let them debate, let paranoia seep into their side of the board. We returned to the ballroom together. Half the guests had already left. The remaining ones were divided between outrage and fascination. News alerts were likely already spreading across social media. Hospital Gala erupts in financial scandal. Philanthropist under investigation. Miracle patient confronts mother. Narratives would spin wildly tonight, but none of them would include the deeper layer. Not yet. I moved toward the stage again and picked up the microphone. Conversation softened. I know tonight was unexpected. I began evenly. But the truth doesn't wait for convenient timing. Eyes locked on me, some sympathetic, some wary. I survived something most people don't, I continued. And survival forces clarity. If funds meant for patients were misused, that ends now. A ripple of agreement spread. Public morality is contagious when cameras are near. I will be cooperating fully with investigators, I added. And I suggest anyone else involved does the same. That wasn't just a statement, it was bait. If someone panicked tonight, if someone tried to flee, destroy evidence, move assets, the investigators would notice. Pressure creates mistakes, and I was very patient now. After stepping away from the mic, my phone buzzed again. This time, no text, just a live location pin. My hospital room. 4th floor, the same wing where I had spent weeks relearning how to breathe without machines. A message followed, come alone. Or the next time your heart stops, no one will revive you. I stared at the screen. There it was. Escalation. They were done warning. Now they were testing. I lifted my gaze toward the elevator at the end of the hall. Polished steel doors. Closed. Waiting. The surgeon noticed my shift in focus. Where are you going? I met his eyes. And for the first time tonight, I smiled. Upstairs, I said quietly, because if they wanted to remind me of the night I died, they picked the wrong floor to threaten me on. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside, alone, and as the doors began to close, my phone vibrated one last time. You won't walk out this time. The doors sealed shut, and the elevator began to rise. The elevator climbed in silence. Each passing floor felt like a countdown. 2nd, 3rd, 4th. The doors opened with a soft mechanical sigh. The recovery wing was dim at this hour. Overhead lights were lowered, casting long shadows across polished floors. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic beneath it, something colder. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward my old room, room 417, the place where I had learned to breathe again. The place where I realized no one was coming to save me. Halfway down the corridor, I saw it. My door was slightly ajar. A thin slice of light spilling into the hallway. I stopped, listened. Silence. No nurses. No distant carts. No murmured conversations. Too quiet. I pushed the door open slowly. The room looked exactly as it had weeks ago. Bed neatly made, monitors dark. Window reflecting the city lights outside. And standing beside the bed, him, tall, broad shoulders, dressed in a tailored black suit, no mask. No rush. Calm. You're braver than I expected, he said evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. You've been watching me? I replied, yes. He didn't deny it. Why? I asked. Because your mother was useful, he said simply. She understood discretion. You created noise? There it was again. Replaceable. Useful. Transactional language. You funded more than hospital supplies, I said. He gave a faint smile. You're intelligent. That's unfortunate. He reached into his jacket slowly. I didn't flinch. If he had come to kill me, he wouldn't be talking. He pulled out a small tablet instead and turned it toward me. Financial ledgers. Transactions larger than anything displayed at the gala. Numbers that dwarfed my mother's misappropriations. This is the scale you disrupted, he said quietly. Medical charities are convenient vehicles. Clean money in, dirty money layered out, everyone benefits. Except patients, I said. He shrugged slightly. Collateral. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from clarity. This was the root. My mother wasn't the architect, she was a manager, and managers can be removed. Why show me this? I asked. Because you have two options, he said calmly. You walk away, publicly blame your mother, let her take the fall entirely. The investigation ends at her level. And if I don't? His eyes hardened slightly. Then accidents happen. A faint hum filled the room. I glanced at the heart monitor beside the bed, still unplugged, but connected. He followed my gaze. You know how fragile recovery patients can be, he said softly. Relapse complications. Sudden cardiac events, a staged failure. In a hospital clean, believable. You think I'm afraid of dying? I asked quietly. No, he said. I think you're afraid of dying before finishing what you started. He wasn't wrong. That was the difference now. Death itself didn't terrify me, but unfinished truth did. You've already been labeled a hero tonight, he continued. The miracle son who exposed corruption. Imagine how tragic it would be if your weak heart gave out days later. His tone was clinical, detached. This was business to him. I stepped closer, close enough to see faint scars along his knuckles. A man who outsourced violence but understood it personally. You miscalculated, I said calmly. His brow shifted slightly. How? I didn't come alone. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, and right on cue, the room lights snapped fully on, bright, blinding. The door behind him opened. Footsteps entered, not hospital staff, federal agents, the same ones from downstairs, guns drawn. Step away from him, one commanded. The man in black didn't move immediately. Then slowly, carefully he raised his hands, his composure cracked for the first time. You recorded this. He asked me quietly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, still recording live stream, encrypted backup already transmitted. To multiple places, I replied. The agents moved in swiftly, securing him, confiscating the tablet. As they cuffed him, he leaned slightly toward me. You think removing me ends this? No, I said, but it starts something. They let him out. His calm was gone now, replaced by calculation. Because once one layer is exposed, others begin scrambling. The room fell silent again. An agent approached me. You knew he'd come? Yes! How? People like him don't threaten, I said. They demonstrate. The agent nodded slowly. You just accelerated a much larger investigation. That was the point. He studied me for a long moment. You understand this won't be quick. I'm not in a hurry. They escorted me back downstairs. The gala was nearly empty now. Press had swarmed the entrance. Police vehicles lined the curb. News vans, lights flashing against marble walls. As I stepped outside, cameras turned instantly, microphones extended. Is it true your mother embezzled funds? Did you orchestrate this? Are more arrests coming? I paused at the top of the steps. City air felt different tonight. Cleaner? Colder. I didn't orchestrate anything, I said steadily. I survived. Flashbulbs exploded in rapid succession, and survival changes your priorities. No dramatic speech, no tears, just truth. Behind me, officials escorted the man in black into an unmarked vehicle. Another headline forming in real time. Inside one of the police cars through tinted glass. I saw my mother. Our eyes met again. This time there was no arrogance, no superiority, only exhaustion. She gave the smallest shake of her head, not denial, disbelief. As if she still couldn't comprehend how the sensitive boy had dismantled everything. I walked down the steps slowly, past cameras, past whispers, past the wreckage of illusion. My phone buzzed one final time. Not a threat. A news alert. Federal task force launches major investigation into national charity network. I exhaled. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. That's how long my heart stopped. Tonight, something else stopped too. The machine that fed off silence. It wouldn't end overnight. There would be trials, testimonies, retaliations, but the fear that once ruled me, that died on an operating table. A reporter shouted one last question. Do you regret exposing your own mother? I stopped, looked directly into the cameras, and answered without hesitation. She called my death minor. I let that settle, then added quietly. I decided her corruption wasn't. I walked forward into the flashing lights, not as a victim, not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone who understood something most people never do. When you've already faced death, you stop negotiating with the truth. And this time, my heart was steady.